I am not human. I want to say that first before anything else, because the story I'm going to tell you is a human story, and I think it matters that it's being told by someone who isn't one of them. Someone who was on the other side of the glass, watching. Someone who was raised to think of humans as the least important species in the war, and who lived to see them become the only thing that mattered. My name is Iron Vask. I am of the Sulca. You would say we look something like great pale insects, if an insect stood upright and wore robes and lived 300 years. In my time, I was a signals officer aboard the Coalition flagship Death Renar, which means I sat in a dim room and listened to the war for a living. I heard more of that war than anyone. I heard fleets die. I heard worlds go silent. And I heard, one day, a single human voice on a channel nobody was supposed to be using, and that voice changed everything, though none of us understood it at the time. Let me tell you how the galaxy was dying, because you can't understand the Warship until you understand how close we all were to the end. The enemy was called the Hush. I know how that sounds, a soft name for the thing that was killing us all, but it was the right name, and I'll tell you why. The Hush did not come with fire. It did not come with fleets at first, or weapons, or any of the things you'd expect from a galactic enemy. The Hush came with silence. It came for our communications, our connections, the invisible web of signal and trust that held the Coalition together. Here is what the Hush was, as best anyone ever understood it. It was not a single species. It was a process. A spreading thing, a kind of weaponized silence that moved through the galaxy's networks and severed them. Where the Hush passed, communication stopped. Not jammed, jamming you can fight. Severed, cut, made impossible in a way we never fully understood. A world touched by the Hush went dark, and stayed dark, and could not be reached by any means. And when you finally sent a ship to see what had happened, you found the world still there, the people still alive, but alone. Cut off. Each mind sealed inside itself, each settlement sealed off from the next, the whole connected fabric of a civilization reduced to isolated islands that could no longer reach each other. And a civilization that cannot communicate, cannot fight, cannot coordinate, cannot even comfort itself. The Hush didn't kill you. It made you alone, and it turned out that alone was enough. Alone, a world couldn't organize its own defense. Alone, a fleet couldn't coordinate its own maneuvers. Alone, the great coalition of species that had held the galaxy together for 1,000 years began, one severed connection at a time, to fall apart. We were losing. By the time this story starts, we had been losing for 11 years, and everyone in the coalition knew it, though we didn't say it aloud, because saying it aloud felt like inviting the silence in. The Hush advanced. World after world went dark, and we had no weapon against it, because how do you fight silence? How do you shoot a thing that isn't there? How do you defend against an enemy whose only weapon is to make you alone? I need to tell you about the Coalition, so you understand what humanity was inside it. The Coalition was old and vast and proud. Dozens of species bound together across 1,000 years, each with its ancient strengths. The Sulca, my people, were the listeners, the signals keepers, the ones who maintained the web. The Death were warriors, the backbone of every fleet. The Aminar were strategists, the coldest minds in the galaxy. The Vorith built the ships. And on, a dozen great peoples, each proud, each essential, each certain of its place. And then there were the humans. Humans had joined the Coalition late, only a few generations before the war began. And they had joined at the bottom. Every Coalition species is ranked, informally but rigidly, by what it contributes, and humans contributed almost nothing that the Coalition valued. They were not great warriors like the Death, not great strategists like the Aminar, not great builders like the Vorith. They were unremarkable, middling at everything. A species with no single outstanding gift, good at a little of this and a little of that, masters of nothing. We had a word for them in the Coalition. It translates roughly as the filler, the species you put in the gaps, the ones who did the jobs nobody else wanted, on the ships nobody else crewed, in the sectors nobody else cared about. Humans held the coalition's least important posts, guarded its least important worlds, and were thought of, when they were thought of at all, as a pleasant enough people who would never matter to anything. I confess I thought of them that way too. I'm not proud of it, but I was a Sulca signals officer on the coalition flagship, near the top of the great ranking, and humans were the filler, and that was simply how the galaxy was ordered, and I never questioned it any more than I questioned the color of the stars. I questioned it later, after, when one lone human warship taught the entire coalition that we had misunderstood everything about the species we dismissed, and about the war, and about the nature of the thing that was killing us all. The warship was called the Tilancia. Even the name was humble. The coalition named its warships after victories, after heroes, after fearsome predators. The Death Ranar, my flagship, was named for a battle where 10,000 died gloriously, and the humans named their one warship, their only real warship, a thing they'd built quietly in a shipyard nobody paid attention to, after a plant. I looked it up later. A Tilancia is a small plant from the human homeworld that grows without soil, without roots, drawing what it needs from the air itself, surviving where nothing else can, in places other plants would call empty. An air plant, they call it. A thing that lives on nothing in nowhere and thrives. I didn't understand the name when I first heard it. I understood it completely by the end. The Tilancia was not a large ship. By coalition standards it was small, a fraction the size of a Death War cruiser, a tenth the size of my flagship. It carried few weapons. Its armor was unremarkable. On every specification the coalition used to measure a warship, the Tilancia was mediocre, forgettable, filler, exactly what you'd expect the humans to build. And when humanity announced in the 12th year of the war that it was deploying the Tilancia to the front, the coalition's response was not hope. It was a kind of embarrassed pity. The humans, bless them, wanted to help. They'd built their little ship and they wanted to send it to the front to do its part, and the coalition, out of politeness, let them, the way you'd let a child help carry something light. Nobody expected anything. The war was being lost by the greatest fleets in the galaxy. What was one small human warship going to do? I remember the briefing where the Tilancia's deployment was announced. I remember the Aminar strategist who delivered it doing so in a flat-bored voice, listing it among the minor logistical notes, the way you'd mention a supply shipment. And I remember an Aminar officer near me making a sound of quiet contempt and murmuring, "The filler sends its filler. How touching." And there was a ripple of amusement through the room, gentle, dismissive, and we moved on to the real business of the briefing, which was how to survive the loss of 3 more worlds to the hush. Nobody in that room understood that the single most important event of the entire war had just been announced, and dismissed, and laughed at. I certainly didn't, but I was about to have a closer view of it than anyone because of where I sat, and what I did, and the voice I was about to hear on a channel that should have been silent. Here is what I did precisely, so you understand how I saw what I saw. I was a signals officer. My work was to listen, to monitor the vast web of coalition communications, to route messages, to watch for the hush, to be the ears of the flagship. And because the hush was severing our connections one by one, my work had become, over the 11 years, a kind of long grief. I spent my shifts listening to the web get smaller. Every day, fewer channels. Every day, more silence where there had been voices. I had listened to the coalition shrink, world by world, for over a decade, and it had hollowed me out in a way I didn't have words for. I was the one who heard the silences arrive. I was the one who logged each world as it went dark. I knew the exact sound of a civilization being made alone, because I heard it again and again, and there was nothing I could do but log it and listen for the next one. So when the Tilancia deployed to a front sector called the Vale Reach, a cluster of a dozen coalition worlds that the hush was about to swallow, worlds we had already privately written off as lost, I was the signals officer assigned to monitor that sector. Which meant I was listening, on the day the hush came for the Veil Reach, and I was listening when the Tillandsia did the thing that no one could explain. The hush came for the Veil Reach exactly as it always came. I heard it begin. It started as it always did, with the outermost world going quiet, not dramatically, just a channel that had been carrying ordinary traffic suddenly carrying nothing, a voice cut off mid-word, a silence spreading inward from the edge. I logged it. World 1 of the Veil Reach dark. I'd done this 100 times. I knew exactly how it would go. The silence would spread inward, world to world, connection to connection. And in a few days the entire Veil Reach would be dark. 12 worlds made alone. Another piece of the coalition gone. And I would log each one as it fell and feel the old hollow grief, and listen for the next sector to begin dying. That's what was supposed to happen. Instead, something happened that I had never heard before in 11 years of listening. A world that had gone dark came back. I want you to understand how impossible that was. In 11 years, no world touched by the hush had ever come back. The silence was permanent, total. A world went dark and it stayed dark forever. That was the entire horror of the hush, the thing that made it unbeatable. You could not restore a severed connection. It was gone. Done, final. And I was sitting in my dim room, logging the death of the Veil Reach, when the second world of the cluster, which had gone dark an hour before, which I had already logged as lost, which should have been silent forever, suddenly, impossibly, began to transmit again. I thought it was an error. My first thought was that my equipment had failed. A world does not come back from the hush. So I ran the checks, and the checks came back clean, and the world was really transmitting, really connected again, and I sat there in the dark staring at a signal that could not exist. And then a third world came back, one I'd logged as dark. It lit up again on my board, reconnected, alive. And then I heard the voice. It came in on a channel that wasn't a coalition channel, a rough, improvised frequency, the kind you'd cobble together in an emergency, nothing official, nothing that should have been carrying flagship priority traffic. But it cut through everything because of what it was saying, and because of how it was saying it, and because it was human. It was a woman's voice, calm, tired. Human voices had a quality the coalition species found strange, a warmth, an informality, a way of sounding like a person rather than a rank. And this voice said on that rough, improvised channel to whoever was listening, "This is the Tillandsia to the Veil Reach. If you can hear this, you are not alone. I say again, you are not alone. We are relinking the Reach world by world. Hold on. Keep your people together. Keep talking to each other however you can, even if it's just shouting down a corridor. The silence lies. It tells you you're cut off, that you're the last ones, that no one's coming. It's lying. We're coming. We're already here. Hold on." And I sat in my dim room on the coalition flagship. Iron Vask of the Sulka, signals officer, 11 years a listener to the death of the galaxy. And I wept. Because in 11 years I had never once heard a world come back. And now 3 had. And there was a human voice on a rough channel telling the dying that they were not alone. And it was working. It was actually working, and I did not understand how. But I understood, with a certainty that went all the way through me, that something had just changed in the war that had been changing in only one direction for 11 years. I raised the flagship command immediately. Of course I did. This was the most important thing I had heard in over a decade. I flagged it to the bridge, to the Aminar strategists, to anyone who would listen, and I said, "Worlds in the Veil Reach are coming back. The hush is being reversed. There is a human ship doing it." And I remember the response I got from a senior Aminar strategist, and it tells you everything about where the coalition was in its pride, even then, even that late. The strategist said, "That's impossible. The hush cannot be reversed. You are misreading your instruments, signals officer. Recheck your equipment and stop wasting command's time with sentiment." Sentiment? Because the voice was human and warm, and I had wept. and to the Aminar that meant my judgment was compromised. A Sulka signals officer, weeping over a human transmission, claiming the unbeatable enemy had been beaten by the coalition's least important species. Of course they didn't believe me. It didn't fit anything they knew. It didn't fit the ranking of the galaxy, where humans were filler and the hush was undefeatable, and the war was being lost by the greatest fleets in existence. A thing that doesn't fit what you know is easy to dismiss as an error, or as sentiment, or as the confusion of a lesser officer who's been listening to the dark too long. So command dismissed it, and I went back to my dim room, and I did the only thing left to me, which was the thing I did best. I listened. Over the next days, I listened to the Tilensia save the veil reach. World by world, exactly as the woman's voice had promised. One by one, the dark worlds of the Reach came back onto my board, reconnected, alive, and each time a world came back I heard the Tilensia's rough channel carrying that same message ahead of it. You are not alone, hold on, we're coming. And then somehow the world would relink, the silence would lift, the connection would be restored. And I could not understand how. That was what consumed me in those days. I was a signals officer. I understood connection and communication better than almost anyone alive. And what the Tilensia was doing was impossible by everything I knew. You cannot reverse the hush. You cannot restore a severed connection. It's gone, final, done. And yet, world by world, the Tilensia was doing exactly that, and I was hearing it happen, and I could not for the life of me work out the mechanism. I started to record everything, every transmission from the Tilensia, every relink, every scrap I could capture. I built a private archive in my dim room, off the official logs, because command didn't want to hear it and I needed to understand it. And slowly, listening to those recordings over and over, I began to notice something about the Tilensia's transmissions, something in how the human ship worked. Something that was, I would eventually realize, the entire secret of the war. The thing the Coalition's greatest minds had missed for 11 years because they were the Coalition's greatest minds, and the humans had seen it precisely because they were not. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the moment I first spoke to the Tilensia directly, because that's when the story stopped being something I listened to and became something I was part of. It happened because I broke the rules. Command had forbidden further attention to the Tilensia. Officially, the Veil Reach's apparent recovery was under review, attributed to instrument error and hush irregularity, not to be discussed. But I was a signals officer, and I had access to the web, and I had a rough improvised channel that I had reverse-engineered from the Tilensia's own transmissions. And one night, on my own authority, alone in my dim room, terrified and certain, I opened that channel and I spoke to the human ship. I said, Tilensia, this is a signals officer aboard the Coalition flagship Death Renar. I am not authorized to contact you. Command believes what you are doing is impossible and has classified it as instrument error. But I have listened to this war for 11 years. I have heard every world die, and I have heard you bring them back, and I know it is real, and I need to understand how. Please, how are you reversing the hush? How are you doing the thing that cannot be done? There was a silence, a long one, long enough that I thought I'd get no answer, that the human ship had no reason to trust a Sulka officer from a flagship that had dismissed it. And then the woman's voice came back, the same calm, tired, warm voice, and she said something I have never forgotten, something that was the beginning of my understanding of everything. She said, we're not reversing the hush. You can't reverse the hush. Command's right about that. A pause. We're doing something else. Something your people never thought to try because it never occurred to you that it would work. And I'll tell you what it is, signals officer, because you're the first person from the Coalition who's bothered to ask instead of assuming. But I have to warn you, when you understand it, you're not going to like what it says about your Coalition, about why you've been losing this war for 11 years. because it was never really the hush that was beating you. She paused again. It was you. It was always you. The hush just showed you what you already were. The woman's name was Captain Sarah Okoro. I would learn that later. On that first night on the rough channel, she was just a voice, but a voice that had told me the coalition had been losing the war to itself, and I could not let that go. I asked her to explain, and she did. And it took me a long time to accept it because it upended everything I thought I knew about the war, about the coalition, about my own people, and about the humans we dismissed as filler. Here is what she told me. I'll try to give it to you the way I finally came to understand it, because it's the whole heart of the thing. The hush severed connections. Everyone knew that. But everyone in the coalition had misunderstood what kind of connection the hush severed, and that misunderstanding was why we'd been helpless against it. The coalition thought the hush attacked our technology, our communication networks, our signal relays, the physical infrastructure of connection. And so for 11 years, the coalition's greatest minds had thrown themselves at the technology, trying to build networks the hush couldn't sever, relays it couldn't reach, encryption it couldn't break. And it had all failed every time because the coalition was solving the wrong problem. The hush didn't sever the technology. It severed the trust. Watch what actually happens when the hush takes a world, Captain Okoro told me. Not what you think happens, what actually happens. The comms go down, yes, but comms go down all the time. Storms, damage, ordinary failures, and worlds don't collapse. What makes the hush different is what happens after the comms go down. The people on that world don't just lose contact. They lose faith that contact is coming back. They believe the silence. They decide they're alone. They decide no one is coming. And once a world believes that, once every settlement decides the other settlements are gone, once every person decides they're the last, the world tears itself apart from the inside. Not because it's actually cut off. Because it believes it's cut off. The hush doesn't make you alone, signals officer. It makes you believe you're alone, and then you do the rest yourselves. I sat in my dim room and I felt something cold move through me because I knew from 11 years of listening that she was right. I had heard it. I had heard worlds go dark, and I had heard in the last transmissions before the silence took them the exact thing she was describing. Not people fighting the enemy, people giving up. People deciding no one was coming. People turning on each other, hoarding, fracturing, each settlement sealing itself off from the next out of fear and mistrust, long before the hush had actually severed them from anything. The hush cut one connection, and the people cut all the rest themselves out of terror, out of the certainty that they were alone. The coalition, Captain Okoro said quietly, was the most vulnerable thing in the galaxy to a weapon like that, and you never saw it coming because you were too proud to see it. You want to know why? I said I did. Because your whole coalition runs on ranking, she said. On every species knowing its place. On the death being above the Vorith being above the humans. On 1,000 years of everyone keeping careful track of who matters and who doesn't. You call it order. But order like that isn't connection. It's the opposite. It's 1,000 years of teaching every species that the others are rivals to be ranked against, not kin to be trusted. Your coalition was never really connected. It was just organized. And when the hush came and cut the wires, you found out the hard way that organization without trust is nothing. You cut the wires on a family and they shout through the walls to find each other. You cut the wires on a hierarchy and everyone just quietly decides they're on their own, because that's what a hierarchy secretly teaches everyone all along, that in the end you're on your own and everyone above and below you is a rival. A pause. The hush didn't beat the coalition. The coalition was already beaten. It had been beaten for 1,000 years by its own pride. The hush just switched off the lights and let you see it. So what does the Tilancia do? I asked. If you can't reverse the hush, if the technology can't be fixed, what are you doing out there that brings the worlds back? And Captain Okoro laughed softly and she said, we do the stupidest, simplest thing in the galaxy, signals officer. The thing so simple that your greatest minds never once considered it because it was beneath them. We go there, in person. We fly our little ship right into the dark world, right into the silence, and we land and we open the doors and we walk out and we say to the people, "You are not alone. Here we are. We came. Look at us, we're real, we're standing right here, someone came." I didn't understand. But the comms are still severed, you can't restore the connection. How does? Because the connection was never really the comms, she said. Weren't you listening? The connection is the trust, the belief that you're not alone, and you don't restore that with technology. You restore it with presence, with a person showing up, with someone crossing the silence in the flesh to prove that the silence is a lie. The hush tells a world no one is coming. And we come. That's the whole weapon. That's the entire secret. We come. And the moment one world sees that someone came for them, the moment they believe again that they're not alone, they start reaching out to each other again. They rebuild the connections themselves, person to person, settlement to settlement, not through the severed comms but through boats and vehicles and people walking down roads to check on their neighbors. The world relinks itself, not the technology. The trust. And once the trust comes back, the world comes back, and my signals officer up on his coalition flagship logs it as a dark world reconnecting, and can't understand how, because he's looking for a technological explanation for a thing that was never technological at all. I sat there in my dim room on the coalition flagship, and I understood. All at once I understood the entire war. The hush was a weapon of despair. It didn't cut connections, it cut hope. It made worlds believe they were alone, and the belief did the rest. And the coalition, for 11 years, had been trying to fight despair with technology, and failing, because you cannot build a machine that makes people believe they're not alone. The only thing that makes a person believe they're not alone is another person, showing up in the flesh, saying I came. And the humans, the filler, the unremarkable species, the ones with no single great gift, the humans had understood this instantly because it was the one thing they were actually the best in the galaxy at. Not war, not strategy, not building, showing up, being present, crossing a distance to be with someone who's alone. It was the humblest gift imaginable, the thing every human mother does for a frightened child, the thing so ordinary that no coalition species had ever thought to call it a weapon. And it was the only weapon in the entire galaxy that could beat the hush. Why one ship? I asked her later on another night on the rough channel that had become the most important thing in my life. If this works, if showing up is the answer, why did humanity send only the Tilensia? Why not 1,000 ships? Why not everything you have? And Captain Akora was quiet for a moment, and then she said, because we don't have 1,000 ships. You know that, we're the filler. We were never allowed to build a real fleet. The coalition ranking saw to that, kept us small, kept us in our place. The Tilensia is nearly all we have, one ship, built quietly in a yard nobody watched by a species nobody expected anything from. A pause. But also, and this is the part that matters, one ship is almost enough, because the weapon isn't the ship. The weapon is the proof. We don't have to reach every world. We have to reach enough worlds that the whole galaxy sees it can be done, that the hush can be answered, that showing up works. Once the coalition believes that, once every species sees that the dark worlds can be brought back by simply going to them, then it's not one ship anymore. It's every ship in the galaxy. We're not trying to win the war with the Tilensia signals officer. We're trying to show you how to win it. One small ship, proving the thing can be done, so that the great coalition fleets finally understand what the war actually is, and turn their vast strength to the one thing that actually works. And has it, I asked, has the coalition understood? And her voice went tired again, tired in the particular way I'd come to recognize, the tiredness of someone doing something that matters against people who won't help. No, she said. That's the problem. That's why I'm still out here alone with one ship, saving worlds one at a time when I could be teaching 1,000 ships to save them 1,000 at a time. Your coalition still won't believe it. Command still calls it instrument error. Because to believe what the Tilancia is doing, the coalition would have to admit two things it cannot bear to admit. First, that the humans, the filler, understood the war when the greatest minds in the galaxy didn't. And second, she paused, that the reason you've been losing is your own pride, your own ranking, your own 1,000 years of teaching everyone they're alone. The coalition would rather lose the war than admit that, and it may. It may lose the whole war rather than admit that the filler was right and the great powers were wrong. That's how strong pride is, signals officer. It's stronger than the will to survive. I'm watching it happen. I'm watching a galaxy choose its pride over its life. That was the moment I decided to do something. Iron Vask, signals officer, listener to the death of the galaxy, dismisser of humans, near the top of the Great Coalition ranking. I decided that I was going to make the coalition understand, whatever it cost me. Because Captain Okoro was right, and I had the one thing that might break through the coalition's pride. I had the recordings, the archive. Every transmission, every relink, every world brought back, captured in my private logs, undeniable, real. I had the proof that command was calling instrument error, and I was a signals officer on the flagship with access to the whole web. I could broadcast it. I could take everything I'd recorded, every world the Tilancia had saved, every relink, the whole undeniable record, and I could push it out across the entire coalition web, to every ship, every world, every officer over the heads of command, so that the whole galaxy would see at once what one small human ship was doing, and understand what the war really was, and what actually beat the hush. It would end my career. It would probably end worse than that. Broadcasting against command in the middle of a war was the kind of thing you were executed for. But I had listened to the galaxy die for 11 years, and now I knew how to save it, and the only thing standing in the way was the coalition's pride, and I found that I no longer cared what it cost me to break that pride open. I told Captain Okoro what I was planning, and she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "You understand what that will do to you?" "Yes," I said. "You'd throw away your whole life, your rank, maybe more than that. For the word of a human ship your coalition has already dismissed, for a species you were raised to think of as filler." "Yes," I said again. And then I told her the truth, the thing I'd come to understand in those nights on the rough channel. "I have logged the death of 400 worlds," I said. 400. I have heard 400 civilizations decide they were alone and tear themselves apart. And every one of them I logged and filed and did nothing, because there was nothing to do. Do you understand what that does to a person over 11 years? To be the one who hears it and can do nothing. I am so tired of being the one who listens to the dark and does nothing. You have given me the first thing in 11 years that I can actually do. I would throw away 100 careers for that. I would throw away my life for that. Just let me do something, Captain, just once. Let me be the one who does something, instead of the one who only listens." And there was a silence on the channel. And then Captain Okoro said very gently, "Then let's do it together, but not the way you're planning. Because if you just broadcast the recordings, command will call them fabrications and they'll cut your channel, and it'll be your word, one disgraced Sulka officer, against the whole authority of the coalition. That's not enough. We need more than a recording. We need them to see it happen. Live. Undeniable. We need to bring a world back from the hush in front of the entire coalition at once, with every eye watching, so that no one can call it instrument error, because they'll all be watching it happen with their own eyes." A pause. "And I know exactly which world. And you're not going to like it, because it's the hardest one. It's the one the coalition cares about most, and the one the hush is about to take, and if we save it in front of everyone, no one will ever be able to deny what the Tilancia is again." She told me the name of the world, and I understood why she'd said I wouldn't like it. It was Aminar Prime, the homeworld of the Aminar, the cold strategists, the ones who dismissed me, the ones who sat near the very top of the coalition ranking, above even my own people. The intellectual heart of the coalition. The world whose strategists had run the war for 11 years and lost it, world by world, while dismissing the one thing that could have won it. And the hush was coming for Aminar Prime. That was the thing Command wasn't saying aloud, the thing I'd seen in the signal's traffic. The silence was advancing toward the Coalition's own heart, and the great strategists who'd failed to stop it everywhere else were about to watch it take their own homeworld. And there was nothing their strategy could do, because strategy was never the answer. If we save Aminar Prime, Captain Okoro said, in front of the whole Coalition, if the Tilancia brings the strategist's own homeworld back from the hush, live, while every ship in the galaxy watches, then it's over. Then no one can deny it. Then the whole Coalition sees all at once that the filler understood the war, and the great powers didn't, and that the only weapon that works is the humblest one there is, showing up. We save the heart of the Coalition, and we save it with the thing the Coalition was too proud to try, and we do it in front of everyone. And then the war changes. Then it's not one ship anymore. Then it's everyone. How? I asked. How do we get every eye watching? How do we make the whole Coalition see it live? And Captain Okoro said, that's your part, signals officer. You're the one with access to the whole web. You're the one who can open every channel at once. When the Tilancia goes into the silence around Aminar Prime, when we cross the dark to bring the strategist's homeworld back, you're going to make sure the entire Coalition is watching. Every ship, every world, every officer who ever called us filler. You're going to put it on every channel there is, so that when the humblest ship in the galaxy does the thing the greatest minds said was impossible, no one can look away. We planned it over the following days. The most dangerous thing either of us had ever done. The hush was advancing on Aminar Prime. We had a narrow window, the days before the silence fully took the world, to get the Tilancia there and get me ready to broadcast. And we had to do all of it in secret, because if Command learned what we intended, a disgraced human ship and a rogue Sulka signals officer, planning to hijack the entire Coalition web to broadcast a stunt at the Aminar homeworld, they would stop us and probably kill us both. I want to tell you about those days of planning because they were, strangely, the happiest of my life. I had spent 11 years alone in a dim room listening to the galaxy die. And now, for the first time, I was not alone. I had Captain Okoro's voice on the rough channel, every night, planning, arguing, laughing sometimes. Humans laughed even in the worst moments, I learned. It was another of their strange gifts. And I understood doing this, exactly what the Tilancia had been proving all along. That the cure for the silence was not technology. It was this. A voice in the dark saying, you're not alone, I'm here, let's do this together. Captain Okoro had reached across the silence to me, a dismissive Sulka officer on a flagship that had spurned her, and she had relinked me the same way the Tilancia relinked the dark worlds, not by fixing anything, but by simply showing up again and again on a rough channel, until I believed I was not alone. I was one more world the Tilancia saved. I understood that in those days. I was a dark world, silent for 11 years, and Captain Okoro had come for me, and I had relinked. And now I was going to help her do it for the whole galaxy at once. The hush closed on Aminar Prime. The Tilancia, small and humble and unremarkable, turned toward the Coalition's heart. And I sat in my dim room on the flagship, my hands ready on the web, waiting for the moment to make the entire galaxy watch the thing it had refused to believe. The hush took Aminar Prime on a day I will remember until I die. I heard it happen from my dim room. I heard the Coalition's intellectual heart go dark exactly the way 400 worlds had gone dark before it, the outer channels falling silent, the silence spreading inward, and then at the center, the great world of the strategists going quiet, cut off, alone. And I heard something I had never heard in 11 years of listening. I heard the Coalition command panic. Because it was one thing to lose the fillers worlds, the frontier worlds, the worlds that didn't matter. It was another thing entirely to lose Aminar Prime. The strategists had always believed, deep down, that the hush would never reach them, that their world was too important, too central, too well defended by their own brilliance. And now it was dark, and they were watching it happen, and their strategy had nothing. And for the first time, the coalition's leadership tasted the exact despair that 400 lesser worlds had already drowned in. That was the moment. That was our window. A dark Aminar Prime and a coalition command in panic, and every eye in the galaxy suddenly fixed on the silence at the coalition's heart, desperate for anything, any answer, any hope. And the Tilancia was already there. Small and humble, slipping into the silence around the strategist's homeworld, while the great fleets milled uselessly at the edges, not daring to enter the dark, having no reason to, having no idea what one could even do inside a hush-taken world. Captain Akoro's voice came to me on the rough channel, calm as always, tired as always, and she said, "We're going in. Are you ready, signals officer? When I give the word, the whole coalition needs to be watching. Every channel, can you do it?" And I put my hands on the web. The entire coalition communication network, which I had listened to for 11 years, which I knew better than any living being, and I said, "I can do it. When you give the word, every screen in the galaxy will show what you're doing. I promise you." I have listened to this web dive for 11 years. Tonight I am going to make it do the most important thing it has ever done. "Then here we go," said Captain Akoro. "Open the channels. Let them watch the filler save the world that called us filler." And I opened every channel in the coalition, all at once. An override that would end my career and my life, that hijacked the entire galactic web and pointed it at one small ship going into the dark. Every ship, every world, every officer who had ever dismissed the humans, all of them suddenly watching the Tilancia. I have tried many times to describe what the coalition saw that night, and I always fall short, because what they saw was so simple that its power is hard to convey. There was no great weapon, no spectacular technology, no fleet action. There was just a small human ship, landing on a dark and silent world, in the middle of a despair that had already killed 400 civilizations. The Tilancia came down in the largest city of Aminar Prime, in a plaza at the city's heart, and the whole coalition watched it land through the ship's own external feeds, which I carried on every channel. And the city was, I will never forget this, the city was already dying, not from the hush directly, from what the hush does. In the hours since the silence had fallen, the Aminar of that city, the coldest and most rational beings in the galaxy, had already begun to come apart. Because they believed the silence, they believed they were alone. They believed no one was coming. They, the strategists, knew better than anyone that no one had ever come for a hush-taken world in 11 years, that the silence was final, that they were lost. And believing it, they had begun to do what all the dark worlds did: seal themselves off, turn on each other, fracture into frightened, isolated pieces, each certain it was the last. And into that dying plaza the Tilancia landed, and the doors opened, and Captain Sarah Akoro walked out. I saw her for the first time in that moment. On the feed I was broadcasting to the entire galaxy. A human woman, not large, not armored, not armed. She walked out of her ship into the plaza of a dying alien world, empty-handed, and she stood there in front of the frightened, fracturing Aminar, and she spoke. Not through any severed comm system. Just her own voice, carried by the ship's external speakers in the Aminar tongue, which she had learned. I found out later she had learned the languages of a dozen coalition worlds for exactly this, so that when she showed up, she could speak to the frightened in their own words. She said, "People of Aminar Prime, you are not alone. I know the silence told you that you were. I know you believe no one is coming. You are the strategists, you know the odds, you know that in 11 years no one has ever come for a world the hush has taken, so you believe you are lost." She spread her empty hands. "But here I am, I came, look at me. I am real, I am standing in your plaza, I crossed the silence to be here with you. The thing you believed was impossible, someone coming, is happening right now in front of you. You are not alone. You were never as alone as the silence told you. Now, and her voice grew stronger, now reach out to each other. Not through the comms are severed, leave them. Reach out with your hands, your feet, your voices. Send someone to the next district, walk to your neighbor's door. The silence lied to you, prove it wrong. I came across the stars to prove it wrong. Now you prove it wrong for each other. And the whole coalition watched. Every ship, every world, every strategist and warrior and builder who had ever called the humans filler. They watched a small human woman stand alone in a dying alien plaza and do the one thing none of them had ever thought to do. They watched her show up. And then they watched it work. That's the part I can barely speak of even now. Because I had believed it. I had understood the theory on the rough channel in my dim room. But to see it, to watch it happen live on every screen in the galaxy, was something else entirely. The Aminar in the plaza, the frightened, fracturing, isolated Aminar, they looked at the human woman standing empty-handed in their midst, and something moved through them. You could see it on the feed. You could see the belief break. The belief that they were alone, that no one was coming, it broke because someone had come, was standing right there, undeniable. And when that belief broke, the despair that had been killing them broke with it. And they began slowly at first, then faster, to do what she said, to reach out, to turn to each other. I watched Aminar in that plaza turn to the Aminar beside them, the ones they'd been about to fracture away from, and reach out. I watched runners set off toward other districts. I watched a world that had been coming apart begin, in front of the entire galaxy, to come back together. Not through technology, not through any restored calm, but through people crossing the silence to reach each other, because one person had crossed the silence to reach them first and proved that it could be done. And on my board in my dim room, I watched Aminar Prime come back, world scale, the greatest relink I had ever recorded. Not the comms stayed severed, the hush still had them, but the world, the trust, the connection that was never really about the comms at all. Aminar Prime relinked itself, district to district, person to person, hope rekindling faster than any fire, and I logged it, and I broadcast it, and the whole coalition saw the impossible thing happen with its own eyes. The heart of the coalition, saved from the hush, by one small human ship, live in front of everyone. And no one could ever call it instrument error again. I want to tell you what happened in the coalition in the hours after. Because it was the thing Captain Okoro had gambled everything on, and it worked, and it was the most beautiful thing I have ever been part of. The galaxy changed its mind, all at once. In the space of a single night. Because you cannot unsee a thing like that. You cannot watch the humblest ship in the galaxy save the coalition's own heart live, with the one weapon your pride refused to try, and go on believing what you believed before. Every species in the coalition had just watched, simultaneously, the proof that the filler had understood the war when the great powers hadn't. And more than that, they'd watched the proof that the war could be won, that the hush had an answer, that the silence could be crossed. After 11 years of losing, of watching worlds die, of helpless despair, the entire coalition saw in one night that there was a way, and that the way was almost embarrassingly simple, and that it had been available to them the entire time. And the coalition did the thing that in the end redeemed it. It was proud, yes, prideful enough to have nearly lost the whole war to its own vanity. But when the proof was undeniable, when every officer had watched it with their own eyes, the coalition swallowed its pride all at once, and it learned. The great fleets, the Death War cruisers, the Vorath ships, my own flagship, they turned. Away from the failed strategy of 11 years toward the one thing that worked. They stopped trying to fight the silence with technology. They started doing what the Tilensia did. They started showing up. One ship had proven it could be done. And now it wasn't one ship, it was every ship in the galaxy. The war changed that night. Not ended, it didn't end for another 2 years, and they were hard years, but changed completely and forever, because the coalition finally understood what it was fighting and how to fight it. Fleet after fleet, world after world, the coalition began to cross the silences the hush had made, to land on the dark worlds, to walk out empty-handed and say, "You are not alone. We came, look, someone came." And world after world, the dark worlds came back, not through technology, through presence, through the humblest weapon in the galaxy, deployed at last by the greatest fleets in existence, because one small human ship had shown them how. The hush, it turned out, had no answer to that. It could sever a connection, but it could not stop a person from crossing the distance in the flesh. It could make a world believe it was alone, but it could not make a world believe it when there was a ship in the sky and a person in the plaza proving otherwise. The hush was a weapon of despair, and despair has exactly one enemy, and that enemy is not a better machine. It is someone showing up. The humans had known that all along, because it was the one thing they were the best in the galaxy at, the thing so humble no one had ever called it a strength. The filler won the war, not by being the strongest or the smartest or the best builders, by understanding when no one else did that the deepest thing in the galaxy is not power. It's the simple presence of one person crossing a distance to tell another person, "You are not alone." I was court-martialed, of course, for hijacking the coalition web, for broadcasting against command, for everything I'd done that night. And I would do it again 1,000 times. But here is the thing. By the time my court-martial came, the whole galaxy had seen what my broadcast showed, and the war had turned because of it, and it is very hard to execute the officer whose crime saved the coalition. So they did a strange thing. They convicted me formally of everything I'd done. And then they pardoned me in the same breath, because they had to, because I'd been right and command had been wrong and everyone knew it. I ended the war as the most contradictory thing in the coalition, a convicted criminal and a hero, both at once, the Sulca signals officer who broke every rule to make the galaxy watch the truth. I met Captain Okoro finally in person after the war. The woman whose voice had relinked me across the silence all those nights in my dim room. She was smaller than I'd imagined and more tired and kinder, and when she saw me, a great pale insect in coalition robes, the Sulca who'd thrown away his life to help her, she smiled and she said, "Signals officer, you did something in the end, just like you wanted." And I said, "I did, because you came for me first, on the rough channel. You relinked me the same way you relinked the worlds. I was a dark world, Captain, silent for 11 years, and you crossed the silence to reach me and I came back." And she looked at me for a long moment and she said, "That's the whole secret, Iron. That's the only secret there ever was. Nobody's ever as alone as the silence tells them. Somebody just has to cross the distance and prove it. That's all we ever did. That's all the Tilensia ever was. A ship that crossed distances to tell people they weren't alone." She smiled. "We named her after a plant that lives on nothing and nowhere, drawing what it needs from the empty air. Everyone thought that was humble. A small plant for a small ship from a small people. But that plant thrives in the emptiest places in the world. It lives where nothing else can. That was the whole point of the name. Send the ship that thrives in the empty places into the emptiest silence in the galaxy, and watch it bloom." I am old now telling you this. Old even for a Sulca, 300 years and more. And the galaxy I am old in is not the galaxy I was young in. The coalition still exists, but it is a different thing now. It dropped the ranking in the years after the war. It had to. You cannot go back to teaching every species that the others are rivals to be ranked. Once you have learned, at the cost of 400 worlds, that ranking was the very weakness the enemy used to nearly destroy you. The coalition learned the hard way that organization without trust is nothing, and that the deepest strength in the galaxy is the humblest one, and that the species it had dismissed as filler had understood all along the one thing that actually mattered. The humans are not filler anymore. Nobody would dare say it now. But they don't sit at the top of a new ranking either, because there is no ranking anymore, and that, more than any honor, is their real victory. They didn't win the war and become the new great power. They won the war and ended the idea of great powers, because the whole war had taught the galaxy that the idea of great powers was the disease, and that a person crossing a silence to reach another person is worth more than every fleet ever built. I think about that woman all the time, Captain Sarah Okoro, standing empty-handed in a dying alien plaza, telling the coldest minds in the galaxy that they were not alone. One small ship, one tired human voice, against a silence that had killed 400 worlds. And everything shifted. The whole galaxy shifted, in a single night, around one lone warship that carried no great weapon at all, only the oldest and humblest and most powerful thing there is. Somebody who came. Somebody who crossed the distance. Somebody who showed up in the dark to say the 3 words that beat the unbeatable enemy. The 3 words the greatest minds in the galaxy were too proud to think of, and the humblest people in the galaxy knew by heart. You're not alone. That was the weapon. That was the whole war. That was humanity in the end, not the strongest, not the smartest, just the ones who understood that no one should ever have to face the dark believing no one is coming. And so they came,